at this moment, that we chose unity over division, that we dreamt of and birthed a happier, more harmonious and prosperous nation. Kenya, honorable members, is greater than any individual.
All right, so the president there speaking in Parliament today, State of the Nation address. We've been discussing it for the last couple of minutes. And ladies and gentlemen, I think before we move on, it would be interesting to kind of just try and imagine what is the next step? How do we move from here? What are the options that are available, Yvonne, if now whatever has been collected, whatever is in those proposed bills and the report itself, to proceed to the next thing? How do they, which legs do they use?
Yeah, well, for one, I just want to talk about this issue of consensus, because that seems to be what is sort of holding this process in limbo right now. I mean, I think having the word consensus side by side with the word referendum is a bit confounding to me. A referendum is by design a choice between two options. You either agree with the amendments or you do not. Having a consensus document would be impossible to this point that 45 million Kenyans are happy with the entire document. And so at some point there has to be a decision that this is the document we have and we put it to a vote, whether it is through the popular initiative route or through a parliamentary initiative that we are seeking perhaps in the country, if those are some of the options that they're going to go into. Even if it were to go through the parliamentary initiative, we all know the process of making bills and laws, making laws in this country. There's a number of steps up until a point when all of these amendments are made, then it is subjected to a vote. But this idea that we will get to a point where the Catholic bishops are happy, the evangelicals are happy, the pastoralists are happy, the Tanga side perhaps is happy, the women are happy, the persons with disability are happy, it would be impossible, which is why a process like this is usually subjected to a vote. You cannot have one document that makes everybody happy. And so for me, I think the idea of saying, let's have a referendum that is non-contested, what does that even mean? You know, it's by design, make a decision. Yeah, it's like having an election, and then we say, okay, you know, let's have a non-contested election. Then that means it is not an election, but, you know, it is one person running unopposed. So at some point...
I think one of the points that the people who say that, the people who talk about a non-contested referendum, to be fair to them, I've heard the reasons that they give is that referenda have a way of priming the country for tension in an election, and that was something that has been pointed about, for example, the 2005 referendum. So I do not know whether it is the contention around the referendum in and of itself or the surrounding issues, but the point there usually is that a heated referendum such as this one would be, given the sort of discussions we've seen, coming just a year or so to the election, what would that portend for that election itself, given the sort of discussion we're having about, you know, having a harmonious election where people are opponents, not enemies?
I think for me the problem and where the word consensus comes up, and to their credit, was the fact of how this was sold. It was sold as a handshake and a building bridges initiative that would create cohesion and unity even in a political setting, and then suddenly talking about a referendum. The two are, you know, sort of inconsistent, if you like, and it was sort of the build up towards where we are now, which is constitutional amendments. And I found it interesting when I think Paul Mwangi was here on Tuesday, and he said, well, you know, it's not aimed at a constitutional, the whole process was not to amend the constitution, yet the outcome is exactly that, where we are now. I think it was the selling point of the Building Bridges initiative that it is a unifying factor, but then you come to a point where you're unifying people by going through a process that is naturally in and of itself a divisive process that forces people into a dichotomy of choice.
Joe, the question would be consensus around what? Because if you look at previous initiatives to amend the Constitution, and writes it afresh, actually. When you look at 2005, there was the Ufungamano initiative, and there was the CKRC that was led by Yash Palgai. And so the use of the word consensus, the use of the word reaching out, and all these things of trying to put two teams together really applied. Right now, there's this loose usage of the word consensus because we do not know of a rival document. There should be only the BBI report. If there is a rival position, then that ought to be submitted, and then we can start talking substantively about consensus. Otherwise, for now, Joe, you had asked what the meaning of the word consensus is. In my view, it means exactly the same thing that the word forgiveness meant during the national prayers at the State House. It's normally meant to, serve a particular purpose. But there's something else that ought to be added here, because recently there was the retreat in Naivasha, attended by President and the former Prime Minister, and it came up with a roadmap. So there are actually some dates around that process.
Yep.
Right now, within the 30 days from that time, there is supposed to be a process of collecting 1 million signatures. It should be concluded in 30 days. After the signatures, the referendum bill will now be handed over to IEBC for verification, and that will take 7 days. After that, IEBC will begin a 30-day verification exercise from 10th December to 10th January. We're not too far. It's exactly a month from now the verification process is supposed to start. Then after verification, the bill annexed will be handed over to all the 47 counties. So between 11th January and 18th January next year, that is what should be happening. And then 30 days have been set aside for those county assemblies to actually approve or disapprove the bill. That is between 19th January and 19th February next year. Then you go on to end of February next year. The bill comes to Parliament between February 20th and 5th April next year. 45 days to just process it. And then after that, the next big thing will be the referendum within 60 days, falling between 6th April and 6th June. So in terms of an actual roadmap,
they do have one.
There is a roadmap in place.
But the problem is that roadmap is assuming a lot of goodwill from everybody, because there is not some sort of a legal sort of roadmap or something legislated. It's really a suggestion or a wish list that the two handshake partners actually had about how this ought to go. I mean, the IEBC, for example, strictly speaking, is not under the direction of any one of them. They can decide, between 10th December and 10th January, we have, some busy schedule. We are not verifying any signatures and that sort of thing. So it's assuming a lot of goodwill, but at least it gives some kind of template, something that you can work or discuss around what a timeline would look like. And I think it goes back to what we are saying. Who is supposed to be the custodian of that process and that timeline? I think we want to bring in Francis. You'll have the last word on this, because we need to move to COVID-19. You spend a lot of time in Parliament speaking to all those MPs and other people. Where do we go from here? Like, what are those plausible options of how to move this forward to a point where it grows those legs that makes it a properly legal constitutional process that is now geared towards changing whatever needs to be changed for us to realize what is in that report?
I foresee two scenarios, Joe. Either we proceed with the BBI process as is, or there is a decision that is made that let's incorporate as many views as possible as a country, and of course affect the schedule that Linus has outlined there, because that schedule probably intended or forethought that it will be a smooth process. But because now we can see hiccups here and there, suggestions here and there, recommendations, some of them very strongly held, then probably the president and the former prime minister will have to make a decision on whether to proceed with the document as is, maybe do a bit of the editorial changes as we have been told, and then say tukutane kwa debe, something of the sort, like those who are opposed clearly say we are opposed to this document, and so we will oppose it at the referendum, and the bills that will be coming to parliament will also oppose them, number one. On the other hand, those who are supporting the process will say we support it as is, so let's go out there and campaign for the document. That is option one. Option two is to say let's reopen the document, maybe have a third BBI document. But now the challenge will be, how long will the discussion be? Whose views will be incorporated? Whose views will not be incorporated? Because as Yvonne earlier pointed out this question, at what point will we say that we've had enough consensus? Let's now take the document forward. Let's take the document to parliament. Let's take the document to the county assemblies, and so on and so forth. And remember, the referendum, the bill, the constitution amendment bill, if it ever gets there, if it is taken to the county assemblies, members of the county assembly cannot amend the document. So they will have to support it, approve it as is, or reject it as is. And so the main ground for the main ground for contention between the two opposing camps, those who support the process and those against the process, as it were, will be at the county assemblies. And I foresee a scenario where the next group of people who will be very, very critical in this process will be members of the county assembly, because I don't think it will be very difficult for the proponents of the BBI process to get 1 million signatures, even 2 million signatures. I don't think it will be a very difficult task. The main task will be in the county assemblies, because it will take a lot of effort to convince MCAs in various county assemblies to support or reject the bill as is, because that is the difference between whether we will have a referendum or won't have a referendum. And I would dare think that members of the county assemblies will be the most sought after people in this BBI process, and probably we know that what that means.
All right, thank you. Obviously, a lot of questions that we are not able to resolve tonight. But ladies and gentlemen, the president also spoke a lot about COVID-19, and his speech obviously coming at a time when there's an upsurge basically all around the world. Here in Kenya, we've seen a number of new infections. Today alone, the number, I think the total number getting to over 66,000. Today alone, 23 deaths, that bringing the death toll now to 1,203, I think it was. And essentially, hope in the horizon with the Pfizer vaccine that is in the final stages, where they're doing safety checks and that kind of thing. But I don't know whether the speech, Yvonne, from where you sit, captured the mood or the moment where we are with COVID-19 and sort of what the country needed to hear at a time like this.
November is looking like it'll top October with the rate at which we're going when it comes to the number of deaths, that's for sure. I didn't get that sort of thrust in the president's, or at least, acknowledgement of that in the president's speech today. And like you say, there's that big hope on the horizon. I thought this was the time for the head of state in his State of the Nation address to talk about where Kenya is with respect to many of these vaccines that are on trial around the world, including this one that is, most hopeful at this point in time. The point at which we understand is how to distribute that safely so that it is still efficacious when it arrives at the point of destination. You're hearing things like it is required to be transported at -80 degrees. And has Kenya gotten its hands on the dossier surrounding the Pfizer vaccine and starting to say, okay, maybe we'll take a look at it and see, whether it meets the safety standards, that Kenya would require for this? I didn't see that. Additionally, I thought this would have been an opportunity for him to mention what is happening with Kenya and the UK with regard to the Oxford vaccine. Like, this is where we are with that. And I thought it would have been particularly important, especially in the light of the statement that caused quite some controversy and was shocking, to be honest, from the Cabinet Secretary in the Ministry of Health. That's Mutahi Kagwe. Maybe we can listen to that. And I thought maybe this would have been the time for the President to set the record straight on where we are with that. Just yesterday, CS Mutahi Kagwe had this to say on vaccines.
Kenya itself is working on a vaccine of our own in conjunction with welcome from the UK. So on issues of vaccine, we are committed to getting a vaccine of our own. We are also watching the rest of the world to see whether indeed a new vaccine, complete with the required efficacy, will be produced by the world. But what I did say, and I would like to repeat, is that we will not jump at the first instance at any vaccine that comes out. We will want scientific and educated proof that what we are getting is good for us and is good for our citizens.
Actually, that's sort of not what he said yesterday.
It's a clarification
it was
of sorts.
A clarification. Well, I don't understand what it was clarifying, because to be honest, what he did say yesterday was he didn't seem to understand how vaccines work, how vaccines are developed. And to many who are in the scientific field, it was actually, you know, sort of giving a shot in the arm to anti-vaxxers who have constantly, you know, had the conspiracy theories around, you know, vaccines and that sort of thing. And that was a very big misstep yesterday. No, and I thought perhaps that the State of the Nation address would have used that and pivoted very quickly to just, you know, reinforce where Kenya stands with respect to vaccines and what we're doing. And also, I think Mutahi Kagwe said today that, you know, we're willing to put in our own money. Making vaccines is extremely expensive.
Plus, what he's saying about developing our own vaccine, we're not
developing our own.
I mean, this is
we are part of a trial of something that's being done by the Oxford University in the United Kingdom. But I really hoped that we would hear from the President as to how much resources we are committing towards a vaccine, and to also just clear up that unfortunate statement that was made yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, it felt, Linus, a lot like the President talked at length about what they have done, you know, the stimulus and all of these things, which he has said many times in all those speeches that he's given around COVID-19 since this thing started. And one would have expected something more forward-looking, like what happens now? Yeah. Because a lot of people are wondering, for example, the question of vaccines is very big. I mean, around the world, governments are pre-ordering, you know, hundreds of millions of doses for their people, even before they are very sure about everything with these vaccines, but they're not taking chances. They're going to wait, but waiting and saying, hey, if this thing works, give me this number. And I think that's quite interesting, and it's quite telling. And for developing countries such as ours, we are at the back of the queue. I mean, any time that there's going to be a vaccine anywhere else, it is going to be, you know, snapped up by all these countries in the West and so on, and particularly countries that are involved in the trials. And it helps that we are involved in at least one, but you don't get the sense of proactiveness that then assures the public that whatever it is that comes in the horizon, we will be somewhere there, we are negotiating, we will be at the table where people are discussing how these vaccines are going to be distributed. Did you get a sense this afternoon that the President was speaking to Kenyans who are actually dealing with the reality of COVID-19 right now?
I got a disturbing sense that the President was detached on this issue of COVID-19. Take note, for example, it was after paragraph 20 that we were paying a moment of silence, 1 minute of silence, in honor of those who have succumbed to the deadly disease. It was until paragraph 16 that COVID-19 came up, referred to by the President by name. And you know, it starts in those generalities. The World Health Organization declared COVID-19 outbreak a public health emergency. Great news for the State of the Union, State of the Nation, we must say. Our first case was somewhere down there.
March 13.
March 13.
Right.
Yeah.
The arrangement of this speech is one of the greatest disasters when it comes specifically to the issue of COVID, because it painted the president as either detached or insensitive or not really appreciating the situation the country is in. Remember, this speech was supposed to have happened about 6 months ago. How else would you have started the speech but to explain where you've been for the last 6 months as president? Because what goes up there, Huduma number, a lot of generalities, mainly meant for people who are not affected by this pandemic. The speech comes across as a failure in capturing the magnitude of this COVID pandemic. It comes across as insensitive to the people that have been directly affected by this. By the way, the moment of silence was hardly 10 seconds long.
It was a moment.
It was very ritualistic. How long was it?
A moment.
It was a moment, yes. And then, and maybe at this moment we should take a break. Yeah.